Hola. Hola. Muy buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you for coming here today with such a heat wave that we have. You see that the air conditioning is at a good temperature today, and don't worry, it's not going to change throughout this session. My name is Diego García Cruz, and I'm one of the 3 organizers of the Celsius 232, which is a festival that is named after Ray Bradbury's novel Fahrenheit 451 that takes place every year in Avilés, and that intends to be a gathering point for those the lovers of this genre of science fiction, both in video games, TV series, shows, and books. This is a festival that can take place thanks to our partners such as Espacio Fundación Telefónica. This is the 6th year that we are collaborating with them. It is a pleasure and an honor for us to be here and to be invited and receiving the support that they give us, because without their partnership this festival wouldn't be possible. I will not take more of your time. I know that you're here to listen to Kameron, which makes total sense. I would do it too. And I just wanted to say that, unfortunately, as soon as this is over, we will need to leave very quickly because we're flying to Avilés tonight, since she has certain meetings already arranged in Avilés tomorrow morning. And today's session will be over between 7:30. We will leave some minutes for some questions, but please be aware that we have our flight at 10 o'clock and we need to leave very quickly. So it makes it impossible for her to sign books tonight, but there's a solution for this. Please join us in Avilés, and I'm sure she will be delighted to sign your books there. Finally, I just wanted to say that it's not only a luxury to have her here, but it's also an honor and a privilege that Gabriella Campbell and Laura Fernández have accepted to be with us today. Both of them are writers, and they are great experts in this genre literature. Gabriella is also an expert in everything related with literary creation and how to make your first steps in this world. And Laura is a cultural journalist, very well known, who has worked in journals such as El País and El Mundo. And since you're here to listen to them, I'll leave the floor to Laura and Gabriella, who will introduce Kameron, and please put your hands together for them.
Bueno, hola a todo el mundo. Para nosotros también es.
Hello everyone, it's a luxury for us to be here tonight. We are very eager to speak with Kameron. We are fans of her work, both her essays and her novels, and we want to inaugurate the Celsius Festival that Gabriella and I love. And before we leave the floor to Kameron, we're going to introduce her. For those of you who don't know her so much, Kameron in Spain has only published the Feminist Revolution, the Geek Feminist Revolution, which is a series of essays. It's a must-read in today's world. And also she has published The Stars Are Legion. There's another novel in the way. And for now, this is what we have in Spain. She has won the Hugo Award. She's been nominated to other awards. She lives in Ohio right now, and she's becoming a key character within an ongoing revolution. Finally, the channel that has been used to attack us, because we have always felt that there was a power hub and a geek patriarchy that has moved around in the internet and has tried to silence that we have always been there. And as she says in the Hugo awarded essay, we have always fought, we have always been gigs, although nothing was directed at us, we have always been there, and she claims that the best thing that we can do is to speak up and never be quiet. And these essays are like a turning point, and they tell us to keep fighting, to mute the crowds and mute all these people who want to silence you. But Hurley is not only this, but she is one of the key figures in this movement. Many of us know her through her essays, and many more know her by what she's doing in the science fiction and fantastic genre, and with all the characters that she's creating. And without further ado, we're going to introduce the person that you've come here to see, who is Kameron Hurley.
I always feel so important when I'm introduced that way. Yes.
You're welcome. You're so welcome. Bueno, antes de nada queríamos...
Before anything, we wanted to ask you how the narrative pause was born, where the writer was born, because as you tell us in your essays, you have always been a fan of Conan and of all those characters who are hyper-masculine characters. And in her book, it's fascinating to see the acknowledgement that she does. She recognizes all the coding that she had been given, and she tries to destroy all these stereotypes. And we want to know, first of all, where does this girl Kameron come from? Why does she want to write, and why are these type of characters that she creates? This is an easy question, as you see.
Very easy. I watched a lot of post-apocalyptic movies like Mad Max as a child. That's the easiest answer. My parents were very tired when they would get home after working all day, and so they would go and rent videos back when there were physical video stores. And we watched a lot of bad science fiction, movies, and my dad really would watch almost anything, but I really was drawn to these sorts of dystopic ideas. This was, back in the 80s, during the Cold War, that, we were always like, oh, the Russia's going to get us. History is a circle. So it was very resonant for me, and I also identified, right? I wanted to be a hero, and unfortunately, in the media that I was presented with, the women in a lot of those shows were just sort of, the love interest or the sidekick or the tag along, and I really connected with the male heroes more. And I thought later on, like, well, why can't women also do those things? Why am I only seeing this particular sort of, this particular sort of hero type portrayed by men? Why can't women do that too? Which is why I've written, again, some of the heroines that I've written. And I also was very much informed by my research in South Africa for my master's degree. I looked into the role of female resistance fighters in South Africa. And one of the statistics that left out for me in my research was that 20% of Umkhonto we Sizwe, which was the Spear of the Nation, the militant wing of the ANC, 20% was women. And I thought, and then I looked at other guerrilla armies, and they said, yeah, 20 to 30%, especially in resistance movements, are women. And I said, well, if that's the truth, if that's history, why aren't we seeing in every single film and media presentation that 1 in 5 of all of those resistance fighters is a woman? Why aren't we seeing that? And the answer is patriarchy. And so I said, well, I want to show not only the world the way it really is, but also the way the world could be and the world has been. And so those were some of my probably more formative experiences. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Your characters always have, let's say that they're not nice characters, they're furious characters who are angry against the world. Where does this attempt of destroying the idea of niceness in narrative come from?
I don't know that it's the destroying of niceness. I think because the characters are women, I think that we tend to see them as being more radical, and it jumps out at us more. I'm certainly been talked about as part of like the grimdark, the dark fantasy sort of genre or movement or whatever, like Joe Abercrombie and folks write. But I think it's more for me showing the full extent of how women are human. There are many different ways to be female, right? There are many different ways to express ourselves, and that was simply, again, not what I was seeing in a lot of the literature. I would see a very specific sort of woman. Again, the sidekick, the mother, and women are all those things and can be all those things, and they can also be not nice and be all those things. But I saw a lot less of this sort of unlikable woman who has, doesn't care a thing for other people and is, not nice. And I've seen some backlash to that where people say, well, that character wasn't likable. And I say, well, in Lolita, Humbert isn't likable either. Like, that's not, he's gross. But they're not as, they acknowledge more the full humanity and the full spectrum of men as people than I think that we do as women. So it was important to me to kind of show a counter narrative to that. And they're all, to be fair, they're all many different sorts of women. I think you look at Stars Are Legion as well, where everyone's a woman. There are many different types, but, Nyx, I think, has a certain place in my heart because she really is, she doesn't care about anything but her specific goal, and it is so masculine. It's so Conan. It's so much me looking back at those films and creating that heroine that I really wanted to see growing up. So.
A mí es que ese tema me...
I think that topic is very interesting because I believe that as a writer, it's a great challenge to create a feminine character that you don't like as a reader. Because we talk a lot about the fact that if you want the reader to like what you're writing and to sell books, you need to have an empathy with the character. And funnily enough, we are women ourselves, and sometimes we empathize more with the poor guy, the anti-hero who has been punished, than with the woman who we don't like. And I think it's very complicated to create women who are not nice, who are gross. Listening to Rosanna Gay, she said that it was very complicated to create feminine characters that are unlikable because some people would say that they would never become friends with this person, and she used to say that, do you read to make friends, actually? So, Cameron, would you be friends of any of your characters?
I've been asked, people have said, I really admire, again, like Nyx, who's this bounty hunter and goes around chopping on people's heads, but it will quite happily throw you under the bus. She'll be like, I will sacrifice you to get to what I want. I might have a drink with her, but I would not be her friend because she would kill me. She would make sure I would die. So no, for most of them, no, I would absolutely not be their friends. But to me, a character doesn't need to be likable. They need to be interesting. And if they're interesting, I don't care. And it's very interesting, again, what you brought up, though, is why do we forgive, I guess, male characters who are horrible, terrible people, who are they're allowed to be, good and giving and loving, and they're also allowed to be terrible and horrible. And that's because we've seen more examples of that. It's because we see it in media. In fact, we are invited, right, using the Lolita example again, we're invited to understand monsters. I talk about True Detective and other things where these sorts of media want us, tap into our need to understand why there is evil. And I would say, Charlize Theron was in a great movie called Monster about a woman who murders people and did an exceptional job. Again, she was not super likable. She's a murderer. But the more we see those examples, the more we can treat women, I feel, as fully human. And if we are not given all of the examples, then the only women we're going to see of human, or we're going to, are the ones that we have seen, or we're going to say there's only this one way to be a woman. And I love to show a diversity in how we're portrayed, because I think it helps all of us, really.
A mí me gustaría también.
I would also like to see, aside from what Kameron is mentioning, I would also like to see more men who are more feminine, who fulfill the characteristics that have been usually connected to women, because we cannot only have masculine characters who are extremely good, extremely tender and paternalistic, generous. Those things seem to have a series of negative connotations, and this is the most difficult question that I'm going to ask. What I'm really interested in as a writer is, what do you think are the traps that we can fall into as writers, both female and both women and men writers, when we create a feminine character? What are the traps that we keep falling onto without realizing?
I've had some really interesting conversations, again, since I wrote the God's War novels, and also since I wrote the Worldbreaker series about a young girl who does some horrible things. And one person said, you know, my worry about writing anti-heroes, about writing these horrible, terrible people, men and women, is that a lot of people have not been taught to think critically and don't understand the difference. They don't understand that this is not something to emulate. This is not somebody you want to be. This is to show you how horrible things could be if you go to these depths. That's one of them. And of course, then another one, which is a really good point. Someone said, well, you know, you're showing this character who's had all these horrible things happen to them because they have to make a terrible choice at the very end of the Worldbreaker saga, which I'm working on now. And it actually got me to rethink the ending to the book, because she said, you're showing someone who's endured horrible abuse and terrible things happen to her. Are you making an excuse then for other people to make terrible decisions because bad things have happened to them? And I was like, because I have had, from the time that I first started writing, I went to the Clarion West Writers Workshop, and an author called Jeff Ryman, he said, I wrote a very violent story then, which is a precursor to Nick's, and he said, as writers, we need to take responsibility for the images that we put on the page. And I try to think very, very critically about what I'm doing. And I screw up. I mean, I've screwed up plenty of times, and people call me out, and it's wonderful, because then I'm like, yes, I screwed up. I'm not going to screw up in that way, anymore. So I do. It's something I'm certainly aware of. I think about, quite a bit. Like, what am I falling into? Is it? I see a lot of people sort of. Falling on the strong female character, like that means she has to have a gun, or she has to hurt people, or do something like that. Where in fact a strong female character, somebody just endures, puts up with things, and carries on, despite the world trying to, get her to stop. So there are different ways of being strong, I think, that we need to explore and think about as writers, because it starts to say, well, then there's only one type, there's only one way to be strong, and you have to beat people up. And it's like, that's not true. And again, the same with being a man. There's not one way to be strong as a man. There is not one way to be strong as human beings. We are, again, an incredibly diverse species with incredibly diverse emotions and ways that we can interact with the world. So.
Se reflexiona.
We're always reflecting on how we decode the stories, and how stories are really a double-edged weapon, and have created the world in a certain manner, and we can turn it around and create it in a different manner. There's a sentence in one of your essays that I think we need to be aware of, and that is that as a writer we are responsible for creating new realities. And I would like you to tell us more about this.
I believe that we cannot create something that we cannot imagine. And I feel that my responsibility a lot of the time as a writer is to show you the way that the world could be different, to show you the way that we could interact differently, that we could build different societies, that we could build different hierarchies or no hierarchy, how we could have a polyamorous matriarchy. I want to show the different ways that we could live, to get people to understand that the ways we live now are all made up too. Like, this is all made up. And it's that Ursula Le Guin quote where she says, you know, capitalism, you know, seems like this ingrained thing, and that it will never change, and so did the divine right of kings, right? But it was built by human beings, and anything built by human beings can be undone and by human beings. We've made it all up, and that's what I love about science fiction and fantasy, is it shows people it's all made up, and we can remake it. We have the power to do that. There's not there's not some like divine or fateful you know, thing that tells us that can only be this way. It can be any way we want it to be, but we have to see it. We have to believe in it, and then we can build it.
But the struggle is being really hard, really tough. What you find at the other side is a negative again and again. At some point in the book, you tell us about those writers who used to live in wonderful places in the 50s. They only saw the same types of societies and structured societies. These are the ones who have created the fiction that we are still seeing, and that does not really fit reality. And the first battle, I think that feminism needs to struggle against itself, and then it needs to open towards a common struggle, a common fight. And we see in the internet that from the beginning we see that the internet is a two-edged weapon, where we have received the most attacks, but where we can also give our own answers as well.
Yeah, the internet is a fascinating tool in that it allows people to find each other. And that's great, you know, oh, feminists and queer people, and oh, we found you have fandoms, oh, Buffy, all the Buffy fans. Unfortunately, it also allows terrible people to find each other and to be like, oh, you're a racist too, hooray. Right, and it is, it's sad, but it's like, where did all these people come from? And well, the thing is, they had this little kernel, right, that they were like, oh, well, this one time someone was mean to me and they weren't white, you know, something dumb like that. But they're fed as they start to, you know, interact with these other people, they're radicalized, and it becomes this thing, and it suffuses their whole being in a similar way that, to be honest, I found feminism. You know, I found feminism, and I realized I wasn't alone. I was like, oh, this, no, the world is, everything's made up, and and again, like this, it's a two-edged weapon. It allows people to find each other who are terrible and want to murder people, and it finds people who you know, want to make the world a better place. It sucks. I'm not going to pretend that's, you know, great. It's to some extent, people are finally realizing how dangerous that is. Too little, too late for some countries. But my hope is that they will begin to understand that. The example I was using was, if I own a bar, I'm a private person, I own a bar, a tavern, and someone comes in and they begin spitting on people and yelling hateful things at them, I will ask them to leave my bar. And I can kick them out. It's my bar. These social media channels are not public, government-owned channels. They are communities built by private entities. What I would like to see more of is these sort of communities actually become communities and build them as communities the way we have built communities at all of these other places, and start to realize that they are communities, and they do, again, have that responsibility, right? You have a responsibility for the things that are being said on your platform. You have a responsibility for the images that are being put on your platform. You have a moral responsibility. They don't see it that way right now, and that's an entire cultural shift that needs to happen, but it happens so fast. It happens so fast. No one realized what they were doing. It's the Jurassic Park thing. We were so excited, you know, to figure out if we could. We didn't think, oh, should we? They didn't think about it. And I'm hoping that they're thinking more about it now and the ramifications. There have been some few slight little changes. But we'll see. I think we're actually going to be spending a lot of time within many movements working on harassment, which we've been working on forever. In 2004, when I first started, I was getting horrible comments, and everyone's like, "Oh, they're just harassing women, you know? They're just harassing women of color and white women and men, you know, and all races and men of color and queer people, whatever." And I remember when the Hugo Awards, we had a fringe group kind of come and decide that they wanted to hijack our Hugo Awards ballot and put a bunch of horrible stories from horrible people onto the ballots. And I saw that as sort of a testing for what happened later, right, in the United States. We were being tested for a long time. No one put the brakes on it. No one said this harassment is wrong. There were not consequences for their actions. And so they got more and more entitled. They got more and more aggressive and assertive in what they were doing because they realized no one was there to stop them. So.
Yo estoy muy de acuerdo.
I agree fully with something that Kameron said, and that is that I think that what happened was the same as with the dinosaurs. But besides what we have said about the social media, I wonder what do you do to handle from an emotional point of view all that, because you're very active in Twitter, and how to have these relationships that those replies that are so offensive, so aggressive sometimes at an energy level and at emotional level. How do you cope on a daily basis without and not letting it affect you to a point that you want to leave aside the struggle?
I drink a lot. No, I do drink a lot. But that was mostly post-election.
Siguiente pregunta.
Next question, please.
Yeah, but no, I have I use the advanced Twitter tools now that they have, where I only see comments now from people who follow me and who have a confirmed email address, and it is almost completely removed, like, all the stuff I see. So it doesn't take it off the platform, right? Because it's Twitter, but I at least don't see it. The only, the problem is sometimes my followers see it and then they start engaging, and I'm like, don't feed them. Don't feed them. But yeah, I do that, and then I have a hate mail folder if I get hate mail, which I don't get as much, certainly not as much as I did when I first started blogging, simply because I say all email will be moderated by my assistant. So it doesn't go straight to me. There's something they want, like this immediate, like, I hit you. I need to know you're reading this, and it's destroying you in your soul. And so the idea that, like, I'm going to have an assistant go, well, that's shit, and throw it out, that really, like, gets in there, like, oh, well, that's going to be useless. So it has really cut down on that, too. I have just a few things. I actually just deleted them all because they weren't, like, FBI level they needed to keep. So yeah, I try to protect myself. It doesn't make the world go away. It doesn't make the hate go away. And that's, again, a huge issue. But I have to do the work. I have to take care of myself and my headspace to ensure that I can keep going. And yeah, for a lot of us in the U.S. after the election, it was just drinking. It was just I lost like 3 months. I don't really know what happened. Me telling, it's fascism. People are like, oh no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. There's 3 branches of government. I'm like, yes, and they own them all. But anyhow, it sucks being a historian because you're always right. It really sucks. But yeah, so I do. I work really hard to moderate that stuff and to take care of myself. Yeah.
In any way, and another interesting thing regarding feminist revolution is how it can affect, as a writer, the fact of having a chronic disease. You talk about it, not everyone is in the same situation, of course, but as writers, we can suffer depression, anxiety, other conditions, fatigue, etc. Certain circumstances that make it more difficult for us to write emotionally and also physically, to sit down to write every day. And what you did, the marathons of 10,000 words per day, how do you do that? What is your routine, or how can you cope with this condition?
I am a binge writer, which means I can go weeks and sometimes months without writing anything, and then I'll sit down and do like 10,000 words a day and 5,000 words a day. Or I edited my entire the Light Brigade with all of the edits from my agent and my editor in like 16 hours, because it had to be to the sales meeting that my editor had. And so I sat in front of a computer and just was like this. But I can get really focused when it's that whole, you're charged with adrenaline and you can get really focused. But then I will go and I will rest. I will rest and I won't do anything for a while. And as my agent has learned that, she's learned that she has to give me a deadline for something. She actually just emailed me today. She's like, Broken Heavens, you say you're going to have it done by the end of the year, but I want to see something from you on pages, September 1st. And I was like, oh shit, I got to do something on it. So she forces me to work in those controlled bursts by kind of giving me those deadlines that help charge my adrenaline. As far as, depression and chronic illness, I work incredibly hard. This is why I still have a day job in the U.S. It's a mess. You don't go there. So I have to keep my health insurance so that I have a day job. And I make sure that I take care of myself. I'm on drugs for anxiety and all these things. And it really helps. It does really help. You have to learn when that point is that you need help and not be afraid to ask for help. I actually had told myself I don't want to go in until I physically cannot perform the duties of writing. And I couldn't. I think my book Empire Ascendant was coming out, and I had this huge blog tour and all these articles that I had to do, and I was so frozen with anxiety, I physically could not do them. And I said, this is my career. This is the most important thing to me in my life. I have to go in and I have to get this taken care of. So again, I got a really good doctor, and she's wonderful, and drugs are wonderful. But it is one of those things where you do have to acknowledge that writing is work, and especially emotional work. I couldn't write after the election for a long time. And when I finally came back to writing, I had to, because I didn't want to feel anything. I think that was some of it. I felt so much, and then I was done, because you can only scream so much, fascism, and everyone goes, oh, it's fine. And then you're exhausted. And so when I came back to my writing, I tried to write, and I wasn't putting myself into it. I didn't want to feel anything. My agent got the pages and says, this is shit. So I love her. I love her. I know when it's good, though, because she tells me it's good. So she's like, this is really bad, so I don't want you to work on this, so work on Light Brigade. And I took a couple more months off and went back to Light Brigade, and I said, I need to feel things again. I need to let myself, go into my own background and history and the things that I have felt, and channel that into this work. And I did. And I finally did, and I turned it into her, and she's just like, this is amazing. And I was like, yes, I have done it. Because she tells the truth. She's like, I'm not going to let you become George Lucas, where everyone tells you you're great, and then you write those 3 prequels. I said, okay, deal. So yeah, you have to acknowledge writing is work, and that the emotion of writing is also work. And physically, it's definitely work. I certainly have to take better care of myself than I have, especially this last year. It's been very hard to do a lot of things. But yeah, I acknowledge that I am a human bag of meat, and that I have to take care of myself as a human bag of meat. So, yeah.
And now that we're talking about the process of writing, how does a novel start in your case? Is there an image at the beginning? Do you see a scenario, a character? Because your characters are very powerful. They make the story move. Do you first have the character, or do you have the world?
I think I often start with a character and then I say what kind of world would have created this character. My God's War novels, I wrote the first sentence first, which was, Nyx sold her womb somewhere between Panjai and Philae on the edge of the desert. And I thought, wow, who is this? What kind of world made this person? And I knew nothing. That was all I knew about that world. And I knew that I wanted her to be some kind of mercenary character. And that was how I started that book. It was with this very powerful character who did this crazy thing that apparently you can do in that world. And so that's where that one started. It really kind of, I guess, depends on the book. I think Stars Are Legion, it was kind of two things. I was like, I want to do something with organic world ships. I knew that was very important to me, and something that had an all-women cast, because no one else, I asked all my genre, my friends who write science fiction fantasy and all my fans, like, name a book that has only female characters in it. Like, not only female characters, but just that men aren't mentioned, that men simply don't exist. And the closest they could come was Ammonite by Nicola Griffith, but she still, of course, there's 3 astronauts who come to an all-female world, but of course the 3 astronauts are from Earth and talk about their brother. One talks about a brother or a father at some point. So men existed in the world, but they weren't characters. And I said, no one else has done this. And so that gets me excited, right? When I'm like, oh, no one else has done something like this. How can I do this? And in a way that's really original. So that's where that one had come from. So I guess it really depends. For the most part, though, I like to start with a character and possibly a big idea, like a magic system or a interesting the world building bit. Light Brigade, I started really with this idea of I want to do a time traveling Starship Troopers, again featuring mostly women. And see how that one goes. And again, that one also had just a really powerful voice. It's a first person and just has a really powerful voice for its character. So yeah.
With the Stars Are Legion, I was very worried reading the book, because as Kameron has mentioned, only women are in the book, and I was really concerned because at one moment there was a pregnancy, and then I thought, oh, the messiahs, we've been waiting for the man to come. And you thought about it, I'm sure. Maybe you considered it, right? So this is when I realized that what happens in that world. I'm not going to give you any details. I was reading until 3 in the morning. I mean, I couldn't stop. And I've just personally come here to say thank you, in this. I had to do this.
By David Brin called Glory Season, where it's supposedly, it's this matriarchal world, it's so great, but they spend the entire book running around with this male character who gets his ass lost on the planet or something. It's really stupid. He's some astronaut, right, that comes in. So it's a very common thing. And in fact, I know a lot of people who get halfway through Stars Are Legion and go, wait a minute, are there no men in this world? It takes them a while. Even my editor, he was writing up the offer. And he had seen the first 3 chapters and the outline, and he emailed my agent, and he's like, Hannah, am I right in that there are no men in this book? She's like, she was the one who told me, I don't know if we can sell a book with no men in it. She really said that. This was before Ann Leckie, and she's like, that's right, Joe. And he goes, great, I want it even more now. And I was like, oh, thank you, Ann Leckie, thank you. I really do feel that I talk to Ann about that all the time, where because Ancillary Justice did so well, I do think that helped kind of pave the way for that book really doing as well as it did, because you always have to be kind of pushing the line, especially in publishing. You have to have something to point to and say, well, this did really well. Why can't we take a risk on this book too? So.
I remember when people recommended books years ago saying, this one's really good because it's a revolution, there's a sex change in it, or things like that, or also Plans of Steel Beaches of Steel by Varley. And I was reading that and saying, where's the emotion? Where's sexuality in this? I couldn't really find anything interesting there. And then I remember that I went to bed thinking, you know, the challenge of if you clap your hands, nobody's there to listen, to hear it. And then I was thinking, if there are no men, are they just all of them lesbian or not? Or is this an extra? But I was just thinking, are they? What is your opinion on this? What do you think about all this?
In my own work or in his?
In Stars of Legion.
And I say, of course, they're all lesbians. I mean, maybe some are asexual. That's fine.
That's what I wanted to think.
Yeah, you know, but again, and here's the thing too with sexuality, and it gets obscured. Having sex is not all about having babies. We are social animals, and social animals have sex because yes, it feels good, and also it's about creating social ties, right, and becoming closer to other people. And it really annoys me if it's all about babies, and I'm like, well, no, it's you know, yeah, I mean, it's great to have babies, but you don't have to have sex now to have a baby. So we live in a very sort of different time, and sex has existed for many different reasons, and that's simply one of them. So yeah, they're totally all lesbian. They're lesbians in space.
Es canon, entonces, es canon.
It's canon then.
Yes.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you about the films of the 80s, because I'm very fan of all those movies, and I have the feeling that you are reformulating some of those films that you watched as a child and that have helped you to recreate things with Starship Troopers, for example. Those movies, and for example, you're a big fan of Die Hard, or all these other movies from those times that with men in out of a place, and women with a different role. This has helped us become what we wanted to become as writers too. Women as someone at long last powerful. Has this brought us here to this current situation?
Yes, I think. Yes. I want to see who I want to be. Like it's like we've been served a lot of these male fantasies for so long that we forget that there are female fantasies that are very similar, of power and you know, being able to be incredibly competent in really terrible emergencies and situations, and we don't see it that much. Yeah, I think you know, we've all been kind of brought up in these stories, and now it's kind of this great time to revisit them and say, well, what are they really about, and how can we kind of reimagine them? I do actually have a gender-bent Die Hard in space that I want to write at some point, because I think it would be fabulous. But yeah, for that very reason, where I do also think that's a perfect script. It's a perfect action script, and I'd love to. And becoming a structure nerd, I blame my agent. But yes, I think that's definitely something that I'd like to explore. Yeah.
There's something that has drawn my attention in some of Cameron's cases, apart from writing and publishing and then regular publishing houses scenarios. She's also very active in other things, such as Patreon and crowdfunding initiatives, etc. And she also works her day work, her real work. I hate it when they say that, the real work. And you work in marketing, right? So, advertising. So how, I think you do this, how do you apply what you've learned from marketing in your own career as a writer?
Lesbians in space.
I do spend a lot of time very aware of how marketing campaigns work, and applying that to how I speak about my work, and how I try to, again, find that thing that makes it stand out, so that, again, people give it a shot, and then the passionate fans find it who love it, and then they tell everybody else. I have a lot of experience, again, with the marketing and advertising, just telling stories and capturing people's attention, and understanding sort of the psychology of how that works. And then, of course, I mean, there's lots of cross-promotion, too. I mean, I bring a lot of the storytelling stuff, I bring it into my day job as well. They love the fact that I do things like this. They love the fact that they can be like, oh, she's written for the Village Voice and the Atlantic and all that stuff. It makes them look better, too. So I certainly have learned how to market my work much more robustly, I think, than certainly many other authors, and I'm not afraid to talk about my work or what I feel I'm good at or anything like that. I love putting together, you know, bags of swag, like buttons and pins and postcards and things. People adore them and have a great time with them. And then also, like, I put together for every book that I launch, like a full, like 6 weeks of blog posts that I write and articles that I write, and, you know, Facebook ads and all of this stuff, and then work sometimes, like with Stars Are Legion, work with a publicist as well, and then we all work together, and they love working with me because they're like, oh, you know what you're doing, and I'm like, yes, I know all the tips and tricks. So we have a lot of fun doing that, and so I think it's definitely helped. There are so many authors who are brilliant authors who are really shy and don't want to talk about their work, and they're just like, I don't know, I guess I wrote a book, please buy it. And I'm like, lesbians in space, get the pin and the postcard, tell all your friends. I have no problem doing that, because to me, you know, we're sharing experiences, and I believe in everything that I write. And that's the other thing too, when we talk about advertising, is that when I do that work is like work for hire. That's work that I don't own. I mean, I come up with the ideas and I write it down, but like by the time it gets through clients and design and all this stuff, it's very different. Whereas the writing I own, and it is I have the final say of everything that goes into that book. My editor can say, I don't like this, or this doesn't work, whatever, but at the end of the day I can say, works for me, works for me. And now, you know, I know when they're telling me things that, you know, are going to make the book better, but I also know when they're telling me things that are kind of against my vision of the book, so I know when to say yes or no. And that's actually what I love, is that I can own my fiction in a way that I can't with the advertising. So, yeah.
And now that you were talking about selling books, I don't know if you can tell us about the science fiction conventions in the US. We'd all like to go there. And also regarding video games, apparently years ago there were very few women, and now all these events that have to do with video games have more. And now with literature, is it the same? Do we have more presence of women and science fiction, etc.?
Yes, we do, and that's through active work at a lot of these places. The Nebula Conference has done a very good job doing outreach to women and women of all races and men of color, trying to get them to feel welcome and engaged and part of this community. Because again, it is very, there are a lot of in-jokes, which we're starting to get rid of a little bit, but there were a lot of odd, like, old dude in jokes that like if you didn't know them, like people didn't really talk to you, and so it was weird. So there are now much more like, hey, here's a welcome reception for people. This is your first convention. Hey, here's 6 free tickets for somebody from a diverse background and that can come to this convention. So there's they're doing a much better job, I feel, making it a safe space. Convergence is a great one. That was in Minneapolis. It just came recently. Has wonderful cosplayers, people dressed up, and they have a wonderful time. It's great. The kids are there. Tons of women are there. And what you see, they have these huge posters up that say cosplay is not consent. And they talk about rules for this is what harassment looks like. This is what consent looks like. And they're everywhere. These posters are everywhere at this convention. And women love to go there. Imagine. Yeah. they have, and they say, we will take you seriously. Here's who you need to talk to if there is an incident. And they take them seriously and they will kick people out because the rules are posted. This is a community. Talk about, again, managing your community. They're like, we are managing this community in this event. These behaviors are not acceptable. So there are a few places that are doing really well with that sort of thing. There's still a few that I'm just like, it's not worth my time. But there are some that are making a lot of strides. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You have mentioned that space with rules, especially cosplay issue. It seems that if you're showing a little bit of flesh, you're like a free buffet, and they can take advantage of that. But what other ways or what other things can we do as writers, as readers also, to help other writers, female writers, and regarding diversity, so that we have more women published, and not only women, but and all LGBTIB diversity, all these. What practical things can we do? Can we launch?
I've done stuff. Obviously, blurb books. Like I will get. People who are new writers, and I read their books, and again, if I get into them, I'll certainly blurb their books. I talk a lot about Rebecca Kwong, who's a brand new novelist, has a book called The Poppy War, which was amazing and dark and brutal, and I loved it. And so I talk about it all the time. So it's looking for new talent and making sure that to bring it up, like, oh wow, that was amazing, I loved it. And then it's also, I also Gwenda Bond, who's an author of many things, and she started this program for like a year where it was a bunch of female writers were paired with young women of color as sort of like a mentorship, and it was just online. Like they would send you work and you would critique it and give them advice on things, or on how to write a query letter, or how what conventions are great, just all that for like a year, and it was great, So there's that sort of thing, and it's making sure to also have people's backs. Like there's stuff I have discovered now that I'm sort of more established. Like when I was a younger writer first coming up in the field, I knew who like the bad guys were, and it was just like, stay away from those people, many of whom we have gotten rid of now, but there are new ones who come up that I don't know about because like I'm considered like a big deal, and they're afraid I'll get mad at them or something and like tell them they're idiots and punch them in the face, which I'll probably do, and so I don't hear about it. I don't see that behavior anymore, but a lot of young women will see that behavior, and when they come out and they call it out, you need to support that and just go, oh shit, I didn't see that, but clearly it's happening, because again, as a more established writer, like you're taken more seriously than younger women writers too. So it's about supporting each other too. Within the community, and recommending people. I get this all the time. Someone will ask me, can you do such and such event, or such and such a project? I say, well, no, but you could call this, young women writer, or new woman writer. So I try to make sure that when I recommend people for things, or that, people come to me for those sorts of things, that I have those names top of mind.
And are you aware of that power that you have now, that you have more influence within feminism?
It's really hard. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Because I come to stuff like this, and you're like, oh, wow. Like I got, my editor sent me like, here's your press schedule for the morning. And I was like, oh, like a celebrity, because in your daily life, again, you know, an advertiser, like, you're just nobody. You're just like, you know, oh, I'm a person on the street. And I hear this, again, from male authors all the time, too. They don't feel like the things that they say are of importance or have, again, it's that whole responsibility thing. They don't feel that responsibility in their everyday lives. And I'm like, but just because you don't feel that way doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it is hard to realize, like, when you say something that it is taken seriously. Someone tried to ask me, not an interview here, but somewhere else, so just, well, what do you think of Margaret Atwood and this and this and this? And I was just like, I'm not starting with Margaret Atwood. don't get started with me. But to realize, like, your voice, you know, does influence people and does have importance, comes with the responsibility part, and you do have to accept it, and it sucks sometimes. But yeah, I'm aware of it, and I think you should be. You have to be. Once you publish a book, it's stupid. Even though, again, you're like, I'm poor, I don't make any money on the writing, but it's the allure. You know, there is a power that comes with all this stuff, and like your face being up on and your name being up on screens. Like whether you feel it or not, it's there. So yeah, I try to be aware of it and wield it in a way that I would have liked, you know, someone to wield it for myself, you know, and to help other people. So, and again, just to take responsibility for stuff that I say, for all of that. I just think that that's a really important part of being human, and especially being someone in the public space, which I think as a creator you just are, whether you like it or not. People put you there, so.
Out of the books that you've written up to now, which one was the most difficult for you to write? Which one was the labor?
They were all a labor in their own way. Every child you birth is different. It's a different thing. I think it really depends. I think certainly my second book was difficult. I actually cut the entire second half of that book and rewrote it. But honestly, the one I'm working on right now, the third book in the World Breaker series, is probably the hardest. Because again, I set it up with this character, before all of this darkness descended, I set up with this character who had to she had two choices, and that's all the choices she had. And I set her up to evil, and then that person said, well, but if you show her being abused and then doing something bad, like, does that, you know, you take responsibility, right? And I'm like, I need to start really thinking and interrogating this story a lot more than I have. And I realized that I had fallen into the dichotomy of two choices, of black and white, of either or. And I realized there was a third choice. And so I'm fixing that book, but it has been exhausting. It has been a long process. And it's always hard when, again, you know, you used to your agent being like, this is brilliant, and they come back like, this is shit. And you're like, I've lost it, I'll never write again. So coming back to that project has been exhausting, but we're getting there. Again, I owe her pages in September, so something will be written, so that's good. But I am figuring out, I think, a lot of the issues that I had with that one. But again, they're all different in their own way. And some of that just also depends on what's going on in my own life and in the wider world around me. That definitely affects my writing.
Other things that affect the way you write, I imagine, are the experience, for instance, that you had in South Africa, because you were living there for a while, and you found that there existed different communities where she was the different one. And also, I imagine that the time you spent in Alaska, that is some time that I think that you have idealized, and as I could understand from your book, and the part of the toilet that was outside, I don't know how many degrees below zero, 30 degrees below zero Celsius. How do you transform that into fiction?
The same way I feel as you do with anything else that happens in your life. I think with South Africa, one of the big things you see is all the bugs. The bugs, especially in my God's War books, it's the bugs are the magic. That's how it's bug punk. That's the magic system, and that's where that one came from, because it was the first time I'd ever seen like a house being fumigated, where they put this big plastic cover over the entire house, sealed it at the bottom, and then pumped in poison to kill all the bugs in there, because it was so full of bugs, and I was just like. But I thought, this is an amazing power, right? Bugs are everywhere, and there's so many different kinds. They're so specialized. Like, what if we could actually harness this power and do something cool with it? And that's where that kind of came from. And also, just, South Africa was also for me a time where, again, it was a society where violence felt a lot closer. They're like, you did not walk around outside alone at night. It was like my friend who lived there was just like, I was like, well, I'm just going to the corner, store. Oh no, like, you are not going alone to the corner store at 9 o'clock at night. And it was just this way of living that was much more like the highs and the lows that I have taken, and I think used a lot also in God's War. Just this, especially with Nyx, where she has this, the beauty. There's this beauty and this horror of the world that she lives in, and I love showing both of those things, because it is very human, but it becomes, you see it much more again when you are picked up and put in a different culture than you see it in your own culture. And that it was also very useful. Again, in Alaska, things again are done very differently because of extremes in weather. And also you can ride your bike at 1 o'clock in the morning and it's light outside, and everybody's, it's fascinating. And you see moose all the time just walking around. And these giant animals, they're giant, like you can't believe it. It's amazing. But it's just a very different way of looking at the world, and I think it does. It informs, with science fiction, you're taking people out of their current culture, their current reality, and you're putting them somewhere different. So you use those feelings and experiences that you had, and you kind of extrapolate from that, and use it to fuel and create those worlds, for sure. Yeah.
Y esos mundos tan...
And those such rich worlds that you create, sometimes a bit slimy too. Am I the only one who, when was reading The Stars Are Legion, was a bit grossed out with the slug vehicles and the little slime that they were leaving behind, the trays that left behind? I sort of liked it, but I was a bit yucked. I almost lived in the countryside, and we have the disgrace of coexisting with cockroaches, and it's impossible to get rid of all of them. I remember I was reading, and one of them was just passing by next to my food, and it was like, oh, so gross. And those worlds that you create with such a great detail, and which are so aesthetic, you have a great imaginary. How do you do this? Do you start with like an encyclopedia, or are these things that just come to your mind as you write?
I think about things that I'm interested in, like the organic technology for Stars of Legion, and I just go to the library and I look up some books about organic. Again, like we use wasps to sniff out bombs. Like there are all sorts of interesting, fascinating things that you wouldn't think of, and also like flesh-eating plants, like kinds of plants and things. And then also I have a friend who works in like nanotechnology and thin films and things, like again these organic films they put on things to make them more stronger, or make them camouflage and stuff like that. So I look into those different technologies, and I do the research. I mean, again, I'm a historian by training. I have a master's in it, and I love to research. I love to be at the library. I'm such a nerd. Imagine that. And it's fabulous. And again, I go to the book, go to the end of the book, look at other stuff they've cited, and look those books up too. Skim those books, and it really is. And it doesn't take that long. It's like a day sometimes, a day or two. And then I take I take a bunch of notes. Then I take my notes back, and I start to. I have an iterative process of world building, which means I sort of write like a first draft. that has, it's mostly, especially the Gods Are books and Light Brigade a little bit, it's dialogue and fight scenes. It's sort of just, okay, let's get it all on there. After that, I go through and say, okay, what are the lazy things I'm doing? How can I make this world a little bit different? What are the ramifications of some of the technologies and how they're affecting culture? I had to do a lot more research in about Brazil, because it's actually set in like a far future Buenos Aires, and start to fill in those details of how that world works. And then you do another pass. Do another pass and you go, okay, and now we're going to add in some more stuff from here and here and here, and then your editor and agency, and you do another pass. And it's like a painting. You know, with painting, oil painting, you do an underpainting, then you do the highlights and you do the lowlights, and that's how I feel when I write. Is there is a bare bones first draft, and then I start to layer on all those other things, which is very different from how a lot of people write. John Scalzi lives near me, actually, in Ohio, and he talks about how he edits as he goes, and he literally, when he gets done with his draft, when he gets done, he prints it, or he doesn't even print it out, he just sends it to his editor, like, that's it, he's done. And I was like, I hate you. It drives me nuts. And a lot of us, because a lot of us like have this process, and it's just, we go over it and over it. I know someone who's like, I go through 12 drafts, and I'm like, oh, and she thinks me going through 4 is like, you know, nuts. But some people do. They can just edit as they go. But I'm definitely someone where I layer on that world. Yeah.
A mí me pasa igual.
I do the same thing, and when I think of all those people who edit as they write, I think that I would be blocked by that. It would make me wonder about every single sentence and going round and round on each of them. I need to finish a first draft and then go about it again and again and again, and filling in the gaps, as you say, with all the little details and the images. Some other people are very descriptive, and what they need to do afterwards is to cut off some parts because they pour everything on the page. I think we're going to start the Q&A. If you have any questions for Kameron, now is your moment. Now is your time.
Seguimos. Mira, ahí hay una.
Bueno, gracias por la charla.
Thank you for your work and for today. I wanted to ask you a question from my professional experience. I'm a trainer of engineers, and they are between 17 and 24 years old. Engineering requires some geekiness, and from your viewpoint, how could I promote, especially among women, because there are more women every day within the engineering, and how could I use this geekiness factor to improve their learning experience and train better professionals?
I don't know. Here's my this isn't necessarily what you were asking, but what I've noticed is that I hear a lot of this whole thing of, how do I get more women to enter engineering? How do I get more women to enter these traditional male roles? And some of that is simply addressing issues of sexism in the workplace. Making women feel welcome is that whole thing we talked about at the Nebula conference, inviting people to actually come. And again, and there's geeky stuff you can do, like let's have a board game night, let's have, and be sure that you are making a welcoming environment for everyone. And if there's off-color jokes or something that seems inappropriate, like you really do need to have a line in the sand. Everyone needs, and my mom talks about this. She's in human resources, where she hires people and deals with all of the issues of sexism and stuff. And she says, women just want to be respected. We just want to be respected, and it's like all this crap that people give us makes us not feel respected. So if you bring people into spaces and you again take kind of those, hey, let's do a book club, a geeky book club. Let's things that you do outside of the office. But make sure when you engage in those things that they are actually feeling welcome and they are actually things that they're interested in. Don't just kind of assume, well, Ask, right? Like ask, what are you interested in? What could we do that you would think was fun? I run into this all the time where there's a certain, there was a wonderful woman I worked at a telecommunications firm, and she said, you know, I realized if I ever wanted to be an executive, I had to learn how to play golf, and I hate golf. I don't like it at all. But she's like, all the men go golfing together, and she's like, that's how you get a raise. And she's like, it sucks and I don't want to golf, but I had to teach myself. And so that's what she did, and she became an executive because that's what all the men did. So I would say think of things that way. Think of inclusive things that everyone likes, and watch your culture, you know. Yeah.
También creo que
I think that through literature, luckily, we are finding more and more sci-fi books that can interest people who have a scientific vocation, and that also include more feminine characters and diverse characters, and are more and more oriented towards those ages, because before it used to be only for very young people or adult audiences. Now we're seeing more darker contents, and also adults and teenagers are also getting into this genre. And I have met many people, women, who rejected sci-fi because they thought that it was a male thing. It was a very there weren't any feminine characters, and so you could approach them and tell them that they could read this or that, and you evoke some interest in them. And I think that recommending a book is a good way to promote this, and for instance, a reading club would be a good idea, and to expose everyone to this type of new books that we can find nowadays in the market.
Hola, yo quería preguntarte por...
I wanted to ask your opinion on the need to have segregated spaces, genre literature spaces devoted only to feminine writing, invitations to panels or conventions like the WenCon, because we're organizing a small convention, a small festival of feminist science fiction that is going to take place in Bilbao, and we're receiving criticism because they tell us that it might not be necessary, because they're wondering if we really need a space to talk about feminist literature, or if we should try to incorporate ourselves into bigger conventions instead.
Just to clarify, these are conventions and spaces. Only women are invited to these conventions. No.
No.
Okay, so it's a feminist convention that's just about feminist science fiction.
It's the theme, not the people.
Okay, that's fine. We have those. We have WisCon in the U.S., which is absolutely devoted to feminist science fiction. To me, it's like any other niche. It's saying I'm going to have a steampunk convention, and we're going to talk about steampunk the entire time. I don't see any reason not to do it. I also, of course, that doesn't say that, well, we covered feminist science fiction at this conference, so we don't have to talk about it anytime else. You know, I'm sorry, but, you know, women are at 40% or more of the writers. Like, you're going to have to talk about women at some point. We make up more than half the world. So, yes, it's fine, obviously, to have those sorts of things. In fact, that way you don't have to be at the 100 level, like the basic level all the time. You can have way more interesting conversations with people who are on kind of that same wavelength with you. So I have found those to be incredibly wonderful experiences. But it does not then say, well, you can not have women in all the other programs. It just says this is a specific niche of the genre that we want to speak about, just like this is a military science fiction conference. Great, you go talk about military science fiction. Yeah, I think it's perfectly fine. Again, certainly we have plenty of them in the U.S. So.
Por aquí había...
Aquí adelante.
Yo tengo una pregunta.
I have a very silly question about the Stars Are Legion. Everyone takes for granted that they're human, and as I was reading the book, I wasn't so clear about that. In my mind, as I was reading, they were turning into sort of half lizards, like in the V series. What were they in your mind?
They can be whatever you imagined them to be. It's funny you say that, because my editor, when he first read the first 3 chapters, he's like, are these people human? Are they titans? Are they eating whole worlds? He was unsure as well. Yes, I see them all as human. But if you want to imagine them any way you want to imagine them, that's cool. What I've learned is that half of the reading experience is for me to, like, you know, here you go, here's a book. And the other half is for the reader. Like, the reader brings that other half of that reading experience. And I always hate to answer questions about my work, because I'm kind of like, I just want to let you, you know, enjoy it in your own way. Like, so yeah, that was certainly my intent, was for them to be human, because I found that fascinating. And I think it's much easier to say, well, they're aliens, because, you know, for a lot of people, women are aliens, unfortunately. Even to other women. Again, I've talked about internalized misogyny quite a bit as well. We all need to practice a lot more empathy. So yeah, I really wanted to make them human.
Hola.
Hello. Regarding sci-fi, as you have said before, we are always exploring topics that are related to society, politics, and it's a way to translate this into this genre, and it's a way of making us think about it. Is there any topic that you haven't faced yet in your novels and that you would like to touch upon in one of your novels? Would you like to talk about it now?
Oh, everything. I have a fantasy novel about the liberation of a city and resistance movements that I would really love to do. Just because, again, my grandmother grew up in Nazi-occupied France. My great-grandfather's part of the resistance. She has all these stories, and it makes up a very big part of my life. So I would love to do something like that. Also, I have, again, the gender bent diary in space. And a lot of the reasons I write those things is to discover those issues, discover those things, those questions that I'm asking myself. You know, I didn't realize that Stars Are Legion, to me, emotionally, was about how two people who love each other but are abusive, how they can have a relationship or not. Spoilers, but you know, I had some opinions about that, but I didn't realize that was what that was about. It was about abusive relationships, and about many other things, fertility and all of that. But until I actually wrote it. So for some of that, again, those themes sort of just emerge organically from what I'm writing, and I don't really know ahead of time until I get to the end and go, oh, so that was what that was about. And that's what I love. That's actually what I love about that process. Is figuring out what a story is about. And sometimes, you know, I try to make outlines, but they tend to be very broad stroke outlines, because I love that process of discovery and going, oh, that's what I was dealing with. So.
Hello? Apart from a warning regarding bad things that can happen to us, do you think that science fiction can also be a powerful tool to build the future that we want, the society that we want to become? Do you see a potential in this tool? It is a minority genre here in Spain, but maybe in English-speaking countries there are more people, and I think, what do you think about this?
Yes, Star Trek is a really great example of that. It gives us this hope for this idea that we could all actually come together and do something absolutely extraordinary and take care of each other while we do it. So that to me, and especially right now, like I used to be writing all these grim, dark things, and strangely enough, I no longer feel like writing those things. I'm writing a lot more hopeful futures, where I do want to show people like how things can be different, and it's a massive power of science fiction. Unfortunately, all these dystopias that we thought were like, whoa, here's the warning of what could happen. I feel like people have used them as like a guidebook of how to make the future. And I'm like, no, that wasn't the point. So I almost feel like we have to put out the hopeful stuff and say, hey, socialism's awesome. We can take care of each other. 40 people don't need to have 40% of the wealth, you know. So I need to show people like what we could build if we changed again, all these human things that we think are cannot be changed. So yes, it's one of the most important things I feel, especially right now, that science fiction is doing. I loved that James S. A. Corey's series The Expanse was renewed on Amazon because it shows us having a future in space. It shows that there is a future for humanity, and at this point, that alone is hopeful. I love that there is so much still in that one. Again, it's very hard science fiction. It's very human ingenuity, and I think we need more of those stories. It's great. I was so happy to actually be listening to people in the airport talking about how we're saving the boys in the cave, the Thai boys who were stuck in the cave, because it's like this humans coming together to do something good for once in the news, and people talking about something good and that humans can do good things. And I feel we need a lot more of that. And yes, science fiction can be one of the vehicles that shows us those ways of being.
In the Stars of Legion, when you chose the names of the different factions, were you thinking about anything special?
The different factions. I think I had initially started with, I had some Hindi and Russian names, I think, some surnames, and I played with them over time, and sort of came up with, again, it became its own thing. But yeah, I do tend to start with like, okay, here's sort of the background, there's like the linguistic background I want to work with, especially in science fiction, and then say, okay, now it's 10,000 years in the future, how would that sound, what would that look like, and extrapolate from there.
Hello. Before, you have talked about how when you're writing you sometimes lose that magic that you have inside when you're writing, when you do that sort of writing, but planning too much, you lose magic. And sometimes you feel as a writer that you've lost this magic, that you're not good enough. And I just wanted to ask you and our two other colleagues if you have any piece of advice to help writers and authors who want to follow your example.
There is a drive to write, and there's an emotional satisfaction that comes from writing that makes the downtimes worth it, right? Like, I want to remind people that, yeah, like, that it is ups and downs, like, you're not always going to be the machine running along and writing things very quickly, and that sometimes some books are very different than other books. That's part of the profession. That's how again, everyone's process is very different. And I think I would actually give people the advice to be kinder to themselves. There are so many professions and so many outside interests, I feel like, trying to make us all feel bad for not being machines. And we're human beings. We're bags of meat. And sometimes meat needs to rest. Needs to rest to be more delicious. And I feel that that's true of creativity too, is that sometimes you burn and you churn and churn and churn and churn and churn, and then you are like, well, I got to the end and everything's still the same, and now I'm exhausted. So I would definitely be kinder to yourself and remember why you're doing it. That's always very important to me. My experience, again, after that terrible experience with Broken Heavens, where I was like, oh, I'm a crappy writer, I'll never write again. And then getting back into it, getting into the Light Brigade, realizing how much I really enjoyed the process of writing. Like when that story finally came together, I was like, oh yeah, this is why I do this. This makes it all worth it. And so I'd say, yeah, keep that feeling for when you're feeling very down, for sure.
Creo que también se produce.
I think that behind each blockage or stop, we have several reasons always. Analyzing the reason behind this for you. Is it a physical? Don't feel well, or is it psychological, emotional? And also sometimes we just get carried away by our own expectations and what we require from ourselves, and we forget about just having fun and enjoying the whole process. So if we manage to leave aside this feeling of obligation and just accept that at some time we're just going to create shit and that's it, and I think that nearly all the blockages that I've seen, apart from maybe due to personal problems or physical problems, are associated to fear of not being up to the expectations, or not fulfilling a certain deadline, etc., or not to achieve something that you've achieved in the past. Or I think that when we're amateur writers, at the beginning we'll always enjoy it much more. We don't have that pressure, and then when you've published one book or a second book, you don't really know if you're going to be capable of doing it again. So just to get to know yourself, to understand your own process, is essential, and this is given by experience, I think. In my case, the key is not to plan. So if you don't want to break your plans, just don't plan. As long as I'm having fun, it's okay. If I'm not having fun, something's wrong, and I go backwards, I reread. When I had that feeling that things were going well, and I just go back 2, 3 pages, 20 pages, whatever's needed. But what is important to me is to have that feeling, and I think writing is really associated to intuition, and the feeling is that you have to be comfortable with what you're writing, with what you're telling, with in my case, I need to have fun. If I'm not having fun, something's wrong, something's not right. If I'm bored by the fact of writing, I think I'm going to bore the reader. That's clear. And I think we have the last question over here. No, there's no last question. Yes, one here, 2. One each. Talking about gender in the genre, and you've mentioned the Hugo Awards that have survived to this attempt of hijacking the Hugo Awards in the last years. We've seen women that are winning everything. Aleki Jemsi, writers like them. What do you think is happening? Are they really that good? Are we, us women, that good? Or was there just a thirst for female perspectives, or a different perspective, or is it a mix of both? What's happening?
Writers sitting down and going, are we really that good? Is it really about us?
It is so funny. I had somebody ask me that, is N.K. Jemisin winning the last 2 years in a row like payback for Sad Puppies? I'm like, no, she's just that fucking good. Have you read those books? They're really brilliant. I read that first book of her Broken Earth trilogy, and I literally, like halfway through, when I realized what she was doing, I was like, I am in the presence of a master. This is I'm watching a master of science fiction come into her powers. this is amazing. They really are that good. And the reasons, this is like with anything, because we're making it easier for women who are good the entire time to actually succeed in the genre. And yeah, some people are ticked off. It's like when you are used to inequality, and, you know, like 80%, you know, of the people in your field are men and 20% are women, like you're used to inequality, and suddenly it becomes 50%, that looks like oppression to you. You've never seen equality before. This is what equality looks like. It just so happens we have a lot of effing good female writers right now. Alyssa Wong's amazing, Cassandra Khaw, I could go on, you know, Rebecca Kwong, Bo Bolander has had a lot of stuff. Martha Wells, who's been writing since the 70s, is finally getting some really great attention. She hit the MIT bestseller list, I think, for the first time. And her stuff is extraordinary. Again, these are extraordinary writers. This was one of the things that kind of got overshadowed in the sad puppy thing, is that the work they actually nominated was horrible. It was awful. You read it and just went, what is this joke? It wasn't even like, let's take the best men and put this, it was just horrible nonsense. And I think that yeah, some people are kind of looking at it going, oh, women, instead of going, have you read the book? That is a master of science fiction. And I will tell you, writing at this time, in this kind of golden age that we're having, is very intimidating for me, because I am like among like these masterful people. My agent said that actually when the Hugo nominations came out, she's like, I can't believe your book wasn't on the Hugo nominations list. I said, Hannah, did you look at all those books? Did you? And Cory Doctorow had a book. Rockaway came out. I was like, have you seen the field that we're in? It's an incredible time. I'm just glad I'm here and still writing stuff. It's a pretty intimidating field of people. They're really, really good. So, no, I do. Every time I hear them, I'm just like, are we really that good, the men? And they don't. They don't do that. We're not going to do that either. Yeah, we're really that good. Yes. So,
yo propongo empezar a hacer ese tipo de preguntas a
Then we should start asking these questions to men. With whom did you just have sex with, or things like that, right? It was the dress that you were wearing, right? We've all seen this. Yes, I think we have the last question. I wanted to ask you, Kameron, on your opinion regarding what is happening right now in the fundown of Star Wars. We're seeing that after the last film, there's harassment against the director and the actresses. Kinami Trana has had to leave Instagram, I think, due to the fans' harassment. Does this show, or is it a parallel with what your book talks about? There's been a part of being a fan that is in the hands of men who are angry, who don't want others to touch their things.
Yes. Let's be clear. These are not fans of Star Wars. These people are not fans. They want to believe that the world is a very particular way, and they're a very tiny minority. This is we overinflate their importance because they are allowed to like run wild, and they actually have multiple accounts, and they run sock puppet accounts. And again, we have this massive problem with these communities being policed or moderated is a better term. So yes, this is part of the backlash. You know, it's part of everything else. It's the sad puppy, the Hugo thing. It's the election, right? It comes all the way up. We're watching it come all the way up. And it is. People are really terrified of change because it's that whole thing. It's like when you're used to 80-20, equality feels like you're oppressed because you've never seen it before. And what we need to start doing is educating people about what equality actually looks like, because we are not even close to there. We are still struggling quite a bit. And I don't consider, you know, I laugh at them. Chuck Wendig apparently, you know, still posts their stuff in response to it. I don't know why. I don't know why he does that. I've talked to Mer Lafferty, actually, who wrote the solo novelization. I'm like, here's how you lock down your Twitter feed. And she's like, I already did it because you told me how to a couple months ago. And I was like, good, because solo's coming out in September. And it's sad, right? But it is one of the things that we talk about. And I do that, with my own too, is you lock it all down and you ride the wave. It comes with part of being, part of doing the necessary work of creating more diverse and equal stories. It's sad that that's just like, I say that, yeah, that's part of what I expect. That's part of my job, is to deal with idiots because the platforms won't. So yeah, it's all part of the same thing. It's all part of the same movement. In fact, they've seen, Chuck has pointed this out several times, is some of these accounts very specifically, like they almost seem like they're paid for specific trolling platforms. Like they'll be trolling about, and they're random things. They'll be trolling about, again, the regime, I call it. They'll be trolling about that. They'll be trolling about gun reform. They'll be trolling about Star Wars. And it's very clear, like, this month I'm doing guns. This month I'm doing, if you actually look at their feeds and you're like, these are paid, who's paying for these Star Wars trolls? Like, who would think? But it is actually a thing. And that's what makes it look a lot bigger than it really is, because you actually look at, how all these films are doing, and they're actually doing really well. They're quite fine. So, yeah. Star Wars will survive the trolls, guys. Star Wars is going to be fine.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Well, thank you to everyone for coming. Thank you, Kameron, for your words. It's been great. Thank you to the Space Fundación Telefónica. And that's it. Thank you.